meeting of the Troy Zoning Board of Appeals to order. And my name is Glenn Clark. I am the chairman of the board, and I would like to quickly introduce, before we have roll call, the other members of the board for the general public. To my far left, your right, is Mr. Lambert, and then Mr. Eisenbacher. This is Mr. Krent to my immediate left. To my right is the vice chairman, Bruce Bloomingdale. To his right is Mr. Neal, and to his right is Mr. Courtney. And we have Mr. Evans, who represents the city administration and is a liaison for our business here tonight. And then we have the city attorney, Lori Bloom, here tonight, representing the legal department here at the city of Troy. And before we actually call the roll, I'm just going to actually call on the vice chairman, Mr. Bloomingdale, now to talk about procedures for tonight's meeting. Mr. Bloomingdale.
The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors or peers appointed by City Council to pass judgment on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty running with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. The board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chairman, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with their name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question. For example, they live next door, live behind the property, and so forth. They then state whether they're in favor of or against the variance requested and give reasons for their opinions. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken, unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or table the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes for approval are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County City Court.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So at this time, I'm going to call on Mr. Evans to call the roll, which is item number 1 on the agenda that's published and available for the public at the back of the room or obviously online. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bloomingdale.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Courtney.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. Neal.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here. So we have a quorum tonight, and item number 2 is approval of minutes from September 16th, 2014. It's been a while since we've been in session for lack of business that's been brought before us. So is there any questions related to this item, or is there a motion that someone would like to make? Mr. Courtney, and your motion is what, sir?
Move the approval.
Of the minutes, okay. Is there a second to Mr. Courtney's motion?
I will second.
Mr. Eisenbacher seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared to vote.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Neal.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale.
Yes.
So a question to the board members. Are there any questions or suggestions on changing the agenda for tonight, item 3? Hearing none, I believe we have an agenda that's set for the business for tonight's meeting. Item number 4A is a variance request regarding Salvo Orlando for Casca Building LLC related to 863 Troywood. Mr. Evans, could you present this case to us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As printed in the agenda, this is a variance request for Salvo Orlando for Casca Building LLC. Subject location is 863 Troy Wood, as printed in the agenda, in order to construct a new home, a 10-foot variance from the 30-foot required setback from the front Eden Dairy Drive property line. I'd like to direct everybody's attention to the three monitors to the left and right and behind the board members. This first slide shows an aerial of the neighborhood with the property in the lower right-hand corner outlined in red. Now, the subject property is south of East Waddles Road and west of Rochester Road. There we go. This next slide is the same aerial, and I've zoomed in more closely on the neighborhood to show the specific location of the property at the corner, the northeast corner of Troy Wood and Eden Dairy. Again, the property is outlined in red. I've taken that same slide and overlaid in color the various zoning classifications for the area in the slide. And everything in yellow, including the subject property, is zoned single-family residential R1C, and we have a couple of non-residential zoning categories for other property closer to Rochester Road. And one moment while I adjust the output here. Okay, this next slide shows the elevations of the house that they want to propose for the location. The next slide is a survey of the property submitted by the applicant. Now, at the bottom of this slide is Troy Wood. On the left is Eden Dairy. The subject property is outlined in red, and what I've done is colored the footprint of the proposed house in yellow. Now, the zoning ordinance requires that a new home constructed in this zoning district have a setback from the front property line of 30 feet. Now, this property, because it's on a corner, has two front yards. Now, the setback along Troy Wood will be over 30 feet, but along Eden Dairy, the applicant proposes a 20-foot setback. So they're here tonight requesting a 10-foot setback variance from the front yard setback. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any questions from the board of the city administration? Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes. Was this property split, do we know, when the street adjacent to it was added? Is there any history of a split, do you know of?
Well, I can tell you that the property, according to the assessor records, was created in 1998. I didn't research to see if it was a result of or related to the road being put in.
Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Evans, it looks like on the overhead, there's already an existing home on the property. Are you able to put up on that screen how that existing home compares to the one that's being proposed for construction?
Well, I'm not sure there is an existing home. This is the yellow is the footprint of the proposed home, and there's another rectangle there that shows the building footprint.
Okay, so maybe the
Or,
home
excuse me,
that's-
the zoning footprint, yeah.
the home that's on the aerial overhead then from the airplane may no longer be there then?
Yeah, and possibly we could ask the applicant just to verify.
Okay.
Mr. Krent.
Yeah, because it's a corner lot, my main concern would be the visibility of people turning and not being able to see oncoming traffic or cross traffic. I believe I remember it's 25 foot back from each, from the curb back to create a triangle for line of sight.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So on that note, Mr. Evans, this obviously is 5 feet different, variance from that standard that Mr. Krent was just referring to. We have other homes in the neighborhood and other zoning districts that would be closer than 25 feet? Or this would be the rare exception, if not the only exception?
Well, I haven't researched to see how many homes in the neighborhood corner homes in the neighborhood might be similar to the proposal. What I can say is that it does appear that with the proposed location of the home, there is no infringement in that corner clearance triangle. And if anyone would like me to illustrate about what the corner clearance triangle looks on this property, I can.
If you would.
Mr. Krent?
Because I understand that 5 foot that we're talking about, is that from the curb or the property line?
Yes, that is from the property line. I'm going to try to illustrate it here. I might not be able to that well. No, I've got too many things on this one now. But ultimately, when you go from the corner of the property, which is right here, you go 25 feet along the north along the west property line, go back to that corner and also draw an imaginary line along the south property line 25 feet and then connect them up. And that's our corner clearance triangle.
Thank you for illustrating that.
Sure.
It made it much more clear. So it really doesn't impact that building, does not impact that line of sight. I can
Not
see
the
that.
corner clearance area, that's correct.
Anyone else for Mr. Evans? Hearing none, we'll ask the applicant to come forward. Please identify yourself and
My
who
name,
you are and who you represent.
my name is Anthony Randazzo, and we represent Casca Homes. And I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I think you guys have done a great job in Troy, some of the modifications you have, and I'd like to address some of the questions you have. I brought some site plans around. I want to pass out so everybody has one. That's
Okay.
okay. In that little package, it shows the site plan, specifically kind of like the setback. I think what Mr. Krent brought up was a good point. If you pay attention to the, kind of like this lot has more of an easement along there, and my instincts is that it was probably some kind of sewer easement when they developed the subdivision. So actually, there is no visual impairment, because if you look at the red line to the property line, there's more land from that dark line to the sidewalk. Does that make sense? See it? See that little red line? See the property line? And then there's that vacant land or easement. That's grass. So the practical aspect of it, it's more like 30 feet, so it complies, even though legally it doesn't, but practically speaking, it does, because you don't have the visual impairment, which would be a concern. So continuing on, I think Mr. Eisenbacher brought up a good point regarding the subdivision that was put in, which was put in a decade ago plus. The reality of the situation is, if you take a look at these lots, most of them, bring it a little closer, if you pay attention to them, most of them were 110, 124 feet on the south side. On the north side, they were all 110. Logically speaking, I think what occurred is when they put in that subdivision, which is an asset to the community, in order to get the road in, they removed part of that lot, which made it an unusual lot, although we found a way to make it just fine with the home that we're proposing, because it appears to me that they were all 110 at one point, okay, each one of those. When they created the entrance to the subdivision, they had the 60-foot right-of-way, which would have probably came off of this. In addition to that, the lots to the west, if you take a look at all of these right here, they probably could have removed 20 feet, but they didn't. So, that's that. You can't do anything about that. And the home we're proposing, if you look at your package, and you look at it, look at the elevation, it kind of goes along with what's on the street. We've built 4 or 5 homes on that existing street, and they're very similar to, nice brick home, limestone.
You can just back to the podium because this is part of the public record. So when you're speaking, it has to be into the microphone. Sorry.
Show them the.
Your associate can do what you were attempting to do.
Thank you for
Yep.
that. So I'd like to go through the points that have to be complied with, okay? So from our perspective, if you look at the character of the size of that lot, which is basically only allows a 40-foot wide home, because it's exceptionally narrow as opposed to everything else that's on the street, which, if you have a 100-foot lot, obviously, that makes it much different. And this is one of the only ones that I can see, particularly on a corner. I didn't see anything else. If you take a look at all the other ones, the one across the street is 142 by, roughly 98. And then if you go down the street, the next intersection, it's 120. They're all substantially larger. So our concern is that it's obvious that this is a narrow lot. It's obvious that they probably had to do it when they created that subdivision. So it's exceptionally narrow. The second criteria, this is not for some other location. It's specific to this. And there's no personal thing. It's just strictly the property, the way that it was done. We have not created this. We had nothing to do with the existing project when it was done. Again, we think it's a great attribute to the city. And in reference to the safety aspect of it, we have complete clearance, driving there. It's a cul-de-sac, so there's not a lot of congestion. There's not a traffic issue. And we believe that the home that we've done, it's going to enhance the value of the neighborhood, and putting that home the way it's been designed will actually repeat what's being done. It's a kind of a transformation type of neighborhood. A lot of the homes are being removed, and the new homes are being built, as you can see with that little picture that we showed you. So we think we've complied with everything. We think that this is an unusual circumstance, but we think we have a great solution by doing what we've suggested, and we're very familiar with building this type of thing. Our whole career has been built on smaller infill type locations, so we take pride in doing a really nice job in enhancing what's already there. And also, the other thing too, from a practical perspective, if you look at the floor plan that I gave you, if you had to chop 10 feet off that little floor plan, it makes for like an unbuildable product. You end up with a garage and 10 feet, like a door, and there's nothing that could be beside it. So I don't know how you design it. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for this applicant, Mr. Courtney?
Yes. Don't you have enough space to build the same number of square feet and meet the requirements of the ordinance? In other words, doesn't this show that you could do it?
Without a garage, I think you could. Because practically speaking, if you go to that second page, Mr. Courtney, the floor plan, I won't leave the podium, but you'd have to chop off what would be a dining room, and you'd end up with 2 rooms. But if you didn't have a garage, I guess you could, which, that'd be a little different.
Okay, there's not enough space then to build the square footage that you have and a garage other
Correct.
than,
Yes, sir.
In other words, you'd have to build a smaller house.
You'd have to build an unusual home, with 2 rooms on the first floor, if you had a garage.
Okay.
It'd be unusual.
Okay, but you could,
I guess you could, I'm not sure it would be saleable, but you could, yeah, sure.
Or a one-car garage?
I don't think you'd have any car, because if you just have a kitchen and 1 room, I haven't been in many homes like that lately.
Okay. Anyone else for this applicant? Mr. Eisenbach?
Yes. Have you spoken with the property owner directly to the east?
We have.
And, because it looks like that property is wider than it needs to be.
He's not willing to part with any of that land, but that's a good point. We thought about that, and we've approached him, and he's happy the way that things are,
Because that'd be another home site.
I thought
issue.
about that.
Okay, and then, I've seen a lot of very nice, narrower homes, especially in places with very high property values like San Francisco and
Birmingham.
New York and
Yeah, Chicago. And I agree with you, Mr. Eisenbacher. I think that's a great point. I just don't know how characteristic, typically speaking, on those 25-foot lots in Chicago and 30-foot lots in Birmingham, they're pretty consistent. Taking Birmingham as an example, the Humphrey Limbach area, that's where the Pancake House, they're all consistent. This would be inconsistent doing that, because if you look at the existing homes on the street, they're all characteristic of what we're proposing. So having a little bit of commonality would probably be good. Good thought.
Mr. Lambert?
The earlier question I asked, can you answer, is there a home existing there on the property right now?
Yeah, actually, there's a shack or whatever it was, and it was a nuisance and being vandalized, and we took the liberty of removing it for safety purposes. But that actually, if we would have left that was impaired because it was close to the front. So we removed it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, Mr. Krent?
Just to follow up on that existing shack, was that were the setbacks correct for this zoning? In other words,
It was weird. It was like a cottage or something, like a shed almost, like a big shed.
but the setbacks, were they?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that I think that it was not in the setback. Certainly the front setback was being encroached on because it was close to the street, the front street. So actually, what we're proposing would be, sight line better, because it's going back to the correct new zoning, and it would be consistent with everything that's on the street, particularly the new stuff.
All right, Mr. Ignilo?
I was wondering, sir, in regards to the west adjoining property across Edinbury Drive, we did receive some correspondence that indicated that a Mr. Melenda, who lives there, 3709, is not in favor of the variance. I'm not sure if you are aware of it, but this came in and it looks like November 9th. We don't have any other information other than an email. It just says I'm not in favor of it. Have you had any chance to speak to that party to understand what his objections were, to see if you could get him comfortable with your plan?
We have not, but we will go see him. He has not called us. Is he the gentleman directly across the street?
Yeah, it appears that he's directly across Edenberry.
We'll go visit.
Gary,
Yeah,
rather.
we'll go visit with him and get him comfortable with it, because it's a compliment to his home, and it's not going to affect him at all.
Thank you.
Anyone else for this applicant? Mr. Courtney?
yeah, I'm still having trouble with this. If I move the garage back behind the 30-foot, with the 30-foot, I lose a piece at the bottom, at the south end here. But I've got enough space at the north end to add that and the piece that I lose on the west side.
Okay, if you have the garage, are you speaking of the garage being here, Mr. Courtney? This is
Yeah,
where the
just-
garage is currently?
Just pushing the garage over,
Pushing it over,
so it meets the requirement.
okay, but if we push it over 10 feet,
Yeah.
like currently, may I
Yeah,
approach?
you're going to lose
is it possible
piece
to
down
approach?
here, but you have a big piece up
can't-
here that you're gaining.
You can't, if you're not on the microphone, you can't share.
Okay, so
You
If
can
we-
show whatever you want to him, but.
if we
then you
were to slide,
can't
okay,
communicate.
here's the garage, right here. If you go to that second page, open up that, see where the site plan is? No, not that one. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, see where I've Xed that out?
Right?
Okay, so if we were to remove 10 feet, it would chop that whole side of the house off. So in essence, in this instance, you know, even though it's been creatively designed, you have a garage, and then you have a foyer that's 6 feet, and then you have another room that's 12. Well, we'd have to chop 10 feet off that whole side, which would make it impractical. Does that make sense?
Not from what I'm looking at, because
Oh.
I see 10 foot coming off of the side here.
Yeah, well, we have to.
And I see this piece coming off, but this and this square footage
Mm-hmm.
is less than this.
Well, we have to stay 10 feet from the
I'm
side
sorry,
yard.
you're out of order.
Yes.
The chair recognizes people to speak. This gentleman's speaking. If you want to speak after him, I'll call upon you in just 1 second, okay? Are you continuing, sir?
Go ahead, let him speak.
Okay, so you have to first identify who you are.
Orlando,
Okay,
I'm the builder. I think what he's not understanding that we have to respect also the setback on the side, so we can't just shift the home over.
No, I don't mean that. I'm talking about the garage. You're gonna lose square footage in the house here, and square footage in the front, but you've got all this tail end up here that you can fill in.
You talking about in the back?
Going,
That's a
Straight up.
driveway. That's it.
I can't really see it.
okay,
Can I just
Here
go
is-
see what he's?
to the north side.
Back?
you have to be on the record for the general public to hear every word you say. We are in session, sir.
Oh, okay.
So,
Fair enough.
Yeah, you
That's-
end up with a longer house.
I'm not sure how that would work out, because you would end up with a garage behind the house with no windows. You know, you would basically look into a blank wall type thing, you know, which, I don't know how that would work. You know, because you'd have to attach it, and it would be behind the house, so you'd have a family room with a garage, so you'd have no windows. I get what you're saying, I do. I just think from like a livability, you know, you want to have windows in a family room type thing to look out the back. You're saying pick up the garage and attach it to the rear?
No, I'm
Oh.
saying, move the garage right in, take away this piece of the house. Push the garage in, fill in, push that piece of the house up to the other end, which you have space. Square footage on there is bigger than the square footage you lose here and here.
Mr. Courtney?
The garage goes in, you lose square footage here, you lose square footage here, you
So-
put it on the end of the house.
So here's what Mr. Courtney's saying. If you go to that second page, if we were to push that in, Mr. Courtney, let's say going to the east, okay?
Okay?
Okay, sliding that over would push the garage into the, in this case, the foyer,
Yep.
and then it would go 4 feet into the library, bathroom, dining room, which would only make that room like 6 feet wide. So it would be impractical.
Except you can get rid of that piece of the house, put it on the other end,
You have a good point.
because you have room on the other end, as far as I can see.
I see what you're saying.
Or move the garage over to that end of the house.
Well, here's the other dilemma. If we were to do a home that would have virtually 2 rooms, it's not a consideration for this board, but it would be very difficult to achieve any sort of practical saleable value. You'd have a very unusual home.
We can't consider that here. At this
That I
board.
know.
And you've mentioned it a bunch of times, but I'm just telling you,
And
you can mention it again and again, it's not going to bear on what we have liberty to
And
do
that
here.
I understand and I respect but just following the ordinance and respecting the 40-foot type thing that we are and going through the requirements that are required, I would have to rely back on just the land and the practical difficulty that are associated with this only lot as a result of, I think Mr. Eisenbacher correctly pointed out the division that was created back when it was done, which we're not complaining about. It is what it is, but we have a way to solve it. Again, repeating the characteristics, going through the ordinance, we mentioned the 40-foot exceptional narrowness. This is particular to just this location, and it's not a personal, nature. We did not create it, and then it's not affecting the value, which is part of the reason I was bringing it up, and I know I was repeating it, but if we did something that was odd, it would potentially affect the value of the neighborhood, and that's why we gave you what we do. So that's our case.
Okay, thank you. If you gentlemen can have a seat, please. Oh, Mr. Courtney has one more.
One other question.
Yes, sir.
You definitely need a 3-car garage instead of a 2.
Where I grew up, we didn't even have a garage. But the reality of the situation is we still have a substantial, it wouldn't affect the side yard setback, Mr. Courtney. It would just shrink the depth of it. And it already has a 60-foot backyard, which is sufficient because it's 165 feet deep. So shrinking it 8, 10 feet wouldn't affect this part.
If you move it east, it would.
If you moved it east, you'd end up with, I guess, a 10-foot wide garage. You would.
No.
Couldn't-
If you move the whole garage east, got the 30-foot setback, and had a 2-car garage instead of 3, you would have less that you're taking away from the house itself
Okay,
by moving it.
I see what you're saying.
I think what you've got is a house that's too big for the property, or you're trying to make it as big as you possibly can. Not considering the size of the property. What the hardship of the property is that it won't hold the house you want to build.
No, I don't know that I totally agree with that. I respect your opinion, but I think what you're saying is making the garage 10 feet wide as opposed to 20 feet. How would you have a car in it?
Not 10-foot wide garage. Just make it 2-car instead of 3. You've eliminated the space of one car, and if you move the whole garage to the east, you don't have a 10-foot wide garage.
But you'd move the garage 10 feet into the home.
Right. But you eliminate one of the bays, so you haven't really taken all that much space there. Plus, you have the other end of the property again.
Well, if you eliminated one of the bays, what you're saying is you'd have a 2-car garage this way. If you shrunk it this way, the cars still have to go in straight. It would be a front entrance garage, but it wouldn't affect the depth of it.
If that's a 3-car garage right there with the entrance coming off of Edinburgh.
Yes, sir.
And you pushed it east.
Yes.
And you made it 2-car, it would leave more space in the house.
But the front of the car is pointing towards the east and the back of the car is pointing towards the west, so it's still 20 feet deep.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess you could have a
But
garage.
you eliminate part of the area that you would be taking away from the house.
Yeah.
You still have more area in the house then.
How do you get into the house?
Same way you did before.
But you just have a door. That's all you'd have.
Not by what I'm looking at.
Well, how, I
That's how I get in my house now too, is through a door.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
why don't we ask you two gentlemen to have a seat and have other people share their opinion with the board? I'm going to call on the Vice Chairman, Mr. Bloomingdale, now to share with us any communications we had from Troy residents or businesses.
The one that's been referenced is the people that live on 863 Troywood, and they're opposed. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. They live on Edinbury Drive, and they are opposed to the 10-foot variance.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So now, at this point in time, we're going to ask the public to share your thoughts with the board, and I'm going to open the public hearing. If you'd like to address the board on this matter, please come forward and identify yourself. Seeing that there isn't anybody from the public, I will close the public hearing and bring back the action to the board. So are there any board members who have questions for the city administration or comments to other board members? Mr. Krant.
On the west side of the property, there shows a sanitary, I believe that's, maybe wrong. Is there a sanitary sewer, something running on that, what is running, what's running on that west side of the home? People were speaking that there's some kind of easement request for a utility. What is that? Do you know, Mr. Evans? On the west side of that property? It's not on the property, but just to the west of the property.
Is it something you saw, sir, on
Well, I
the
guess
survey,
the
or?
applicant pointed out that there's some kind of a, it says EX Sanitary HM8. I can't,
Well, those typically are existing sanitary, and MH is manhole utilities.
Mr. Krant, would you like to call the applicant back to the podium?
yes.
Okay,
To answer
Mr.
your question, that would be helpful.
Mr. Kern, I think that's pretty perceptive. I think that those are easements, because if you pay attention to the amount of land that was not part of this property, which is excessive, typically speaking, you have 16 feet and then you have a driveway. There's some kind of easement through there that I think they have utilities going through there, is what it appears to be, because I see the sanitary myself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further comments on that, Mr. Krant?
No.
Okay. Any other board members with questions or comments? Mr. Neal?
My comment would be is that this just strikes me as an urban infill lot, many of which I've seen in other surrounding cities, Rochester being one, Birmingham being another. And it's not ideal, and we probably did lose some land because of the construction in 98 of the other subdivision, but I'm reluctant to get comfortable with allowing the request, in part because we have a resident nearby who is opposed to it. And I think there are some development options that may result in another structure, but in these urban infill situations, I've seen a lot of narrow homes built that are very attractive. I know they have about 30 feet of construction to work with. I don't agree with the idea that we'd be having 2 rooms, because looking at their design, I think the largest room is 22 feet wide. So I think there's ways to make something else work. It'd be a different design home, but I'm reluctant to support approval. This is just my opinion. When we have an adjoining resident who has an issue. And I think we have options that could still end up being a useful structure.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment, question, or a motion?
Well,
Mr. Courtney?
yeah, I have a question for the petitioner. What's the objective of showing us Grosse Pointe, other than to show us big houses and?
Approach the podium. You have to refrain from speaking until you're at the microphone, sir.
The objective was to show you that, we're not diminishing any value in the neighborhood, and we, because it's part of your requirements.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'd still like to have an opportunity to get some more answers on this as to whether something else could be put in there and whether there are easements that prohibit construction in some of the area that I've suggested he build in. In other words, if there are easements there, then we might have a question as to whether it's a variance is suitable or not. I didn't see anything that would indicate easements in that area, but since it's been mentioned, I'm not sure that it doesn't exist.
Okay. So does that propel you to make a motion?
Well, if no one else is opposed, I would make a motion to postpone this item until the next meeting and ask that the developer relook at the issue of redesigning if possible.
Okay, so there's a motion made, Mr. Bloomingdale.
I would like to ask the petitioner, would you be willing to come back with an alternate proposal?
Yes, sir.
We're open to that consideration, and we'd also like to get the compliance from the neighbors, which will go speak to that other individual. I think that's a wise choice.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bloomingdale, are you making a second to a motion?
I will second the motion, yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale seconds Mr. Courtney's motion to postpone this to the February 2015 meeting of the Troy Zoning Board of Appeals. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Lambert?
Just the one point that might be worthwhile, and I don't know if it's in order to make a discussion point on this, but the petitioner might bring it to the attention of the neighbor that the neighbor may be opposed because they think they can have the property across the street with no home on it. If the petitioner goes over and says, well, some kind of a home can be built there, would you like a nice home or would you like another shack? So that might be worthwhile give them the opportunity to talk to them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Courtney?
That's postponed to January.
I'm sorry, did I?
Yes,
Said February.
I had just tacked on a whole 30 days there. Okay, so I'm sorry, my error. So regarding the motion is to postpone until the January 2015 meeting of this board. Mr. Krent?
I just wanted the petitioner possibly to look into what easements are on the west side of the property. Maybe that'll clarify things a little better for us.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Krent. And just for the petitioner's benefit, I mean, I think you understand this, but the setup we have here is not interactive like with one board member. So Mr. Courtney might be available to talk to after the board meeting if you're able to stay. I'm not sure that you are since we have other business, but maybe, and you can address any board member one-on-one, just as long as there's not four of us talking to you at once, which would be a quorum of the board. So hearing no other discussion, I think we're prepared for a vote, Mr. Evans.
And Mr. Chair, if I can clarify for any members of the audience who might be watching that that's postponement to January 27th, or excuse me, January
20th.
Yes, January 20th, 2015.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes. So thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you again in about a month. Merry Christmas and happy holidays. So the next item on the agenda, if I can find it here, is item 4B related to N. Robert and Kathleen Coy, related to the property at 4083 Ledgestone. Mr. Evans, do you have the information for the case
Thank you,
First,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a variance request for N. Robert and Kathleen Coy at 4083 Ledgestone, as printed in the agenda, in order to construct an addition to the rear of the house, a 16-foot variance from the 45-foot required rear yard setback. I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the monitors behind the zoning board. The first slide is an aerial view of the neighborhood with the property outlined in red. This neighborhood is located north of West Waddles and east of Coolidge Highway. I've taken that same map and overlaid the zoning classification, single-family residential for the property. Everything you see in this slide is zoned single-family residential. Now what I've done is taken the aerial and zoomed in closer. As we can see, this property is located near the southern end of Ledgestone on the west side of the road. Most of the surrounding uses are single-family residential. Now the property adjacent to the west is used as a place of worship. The applicant's provided a survey, and in this survey, Ledgestone is on the right side of the drawing. The property is outlined in red. The existing home is shaded in yellow, and the proposed addition to the home is shaded in blue on the left side of the slide. Property owner is requesting to add on a three-season room to the rear of the property, and that's going to result in a 29-foot setback from the rear property line. The variance requires that setback to be 45 feet, so they're requesting a variance of 16 feet. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Are there questions for Mr. Evans from board members? Mr. Courtney?
Yes, this is currently an open screen with a roof.
Yeah, the applicant has provided some photos of the view from the house looking towards the west, and it looks like there's some kind of enclosures, but
Awning or something.
yeah, it looks like a deck. And these photos I'm showing now were provided by the applicant. They're all taken from the agenda package. There's a good view.
Oh, there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Evans? Mr. Neal?
Mr. Evans, I was just wondering, in order to build, well, I guess maybe they don't, there's no already, pardon me, there's been no zoning adjustments to this property?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Sorry,
Yeah,
my brain.
and just so everybody's aware, the ordinance does allow by right encroachments into the rear yard setback for uncovered porches and decks.
Mr. Krantz?
Mr. Evans, would you know the front yard setback for this zoned area?
I can look it up.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, the front yard setback, Mr. Krent, is 30 feet. That's the required setback.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes, you said uncovered,
Right.
so the current cover is,
Is it non-compliant?
It's there.
It's not attached.
that part is actually a violation then.
It appears that may be perhaps a very temporary structure that we see commonly sold.
If you don't like to get wet, you're in violation.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Did you have something? Did you have a question? Okay. My guess is the applicant's letter that was submitted to the board, that was co-signed by the lady and the gentleman. Normally, we only get emails. That perfectly that perfect penmanship is something you don't see very much. So my guess is that the lady wrote it, but I could be wrong. It's very, very perfect penmanship. So if we ever get anything in handwriting, it's usually chicken scratching. So it's beautiful to see. Okay, I think that we're able to call the applicant forward now, and if you want to address the board. Please identify yourself and your relationship to the property.
I'm Norman Quay. It's my wife Kathy. We're the owners of the property.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So do you want to state to the board why you are requesting this variance request?
Well, we're trying to improve our lifestyle a little bit and use a room that we could use virtually all year long with the design from Four Seasons.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for the applicants from the board? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Looking at this picture, it appears that your deck is about the same height as the elevation of the room inside.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this deck, you're not building something the same, you're not covering what you've got existing, you're starting from scratch, building something brand new?
Yes.
Okay.
So the
And
deck would be removed.
And that will also then be roughly the same elevation as the indoor?
Roughly the same. As you can see, there's a little drop off on the curvature of the deck, which correlates to the recessed family room.
I'll be a little clear. The new structure you're putting up, the floor will be roughly the same level as the floor inside, is that correct?
Correct.
And the reason I'm asking that is, from a visibility standpoint from the church, which it seems like that'd be the only one that could see this, there's not a whole lot of difference in regard to elevation other than what you're adding to the top of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other members? Mr. Lambert.
So in essence, what you have here is an unusually shaped parcel of land that makes placing this Three Seasons room at the back of the property about the only place you can really accommodate it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other members? See none, you can have, both have a seat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Bloomingdale, could you please disclose to the board or the public as well?
I'm not aware of any
indications?
comments pro or con.
Okay, thank you. Other than the one we received from the,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
the applicants who just addressed us, which was on file with the beautiful penmanship. I think Mr. Neal has something.
I do have a question for staff.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Evans, I was wondering, as far as cul-de-sac properties go, as far as properties that the road access is provided by a cul-de-sac, would the property at 4083 be considered in the city of Troy irregular or unusual, or is it fairly consistent?
Well, I'm looking at the overhead that I showed earlier, and there's a cul-de-sac on the first street up on the left, Club, right in that same neighborhood. There's also not a cul-de-sac, but a street like that off Drexel, another one on Seymour, just in that neighborhood alone. I mean, certainly it's up to the board to determine if it is indeed a practical difficulty, but I know cul-de-sacs exist in many areas of the city.
Right, they all have that road structure that teardrop structure.
Well, it is tough to get a rectangular shaped lot
Yes.
consistently along the frontage of a cul-de-sac.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Eisenbacher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way I look at the property and the layout relates to the question that Mr. Krent had about the front setback. It looks like the house itself is moved back on the property due to the pie shape, so it's got additional front clearance, and because it's got the additional front clearance, it's a little bit short in the back. And that, in my opinion, is due to the irregular shape of the property and fitting a driveway and the width of the house in. if there's no objections or no one else wanted to participate, I'd like to move the resolution.
I'm going
or-
to
Okay.
just have to interrupt you, Mr.
Okay.
Eisenbacher, for just a second. We haven't had the public hearing yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, yeah, so you just, we'll get to you. You'll be first up. So at this point in time, I'd like to call the public to address the board if there's an interest. And I'll open the public hearing. If there is a member of the public that would like to address us on this matter, please step forward. Please identify yourself and also your relationship to the property, if any.
Good evening. My name is Bruce. I'm with Four Seasons Sunrooms in Utica. And first of all, I just wanted to thank you for requesting a variance I made about 3 years ago. It's a pretty similar situation. Also, there is one correction. I believe this is going to be a four-season room, not a three. So if that makes any difference.
So are you, sir, the contractor for the folks? we just-
I represent Four
Okay,
Seasons.
I understand.
The builder is the owner.
I see, okay.
The existing deck is 16 foot, or has a 16-foot projection, so we're really not going out any farther than that.
So essentially, the existing structure is where you would be working?
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else who'd like to address the board at this point in time? Hearing none, or seeing none, I should say. Closing the public hearing and bring it back to the board. So Mr. Eisenbacher, you have something on your mind.
If no one else wished to speak, I would like to move the resolution as printed, and in discussion of the criteria that we have as a board, for item A, I do believe it is due to the regular shape of the property that this need comes about. For item B, it is related to the premises that we are discussing. Item C, it is not of a personal nature. The house was placed there quite a bit before sunrooms became part of the request. Obviously, they would have switched the house if sunroom was part of the house as constructed. D, characteristic that makes the compliance with the dimensional requirement difficult. There's no evidence that it was created by the current or previous owner. And E, proposed variance is not harmful to the essential character of the area. It is located in the center, back of the house, as far away from any of the neighbors as possible.
I'll second.
It's moved and seconded by Mr. Krent for approval of the motion as printed in the agenda packet. Is there any discussion on the motion by members? Mr. Krent?
I wanted to agree with Mr. Eisenbacher on this, and one other, not to put a finer point on it, but I did look up the rear yard setback. It's 40 feet, so 40 minus 29, you're looking at 11 feet, 11-foot variance. But the front yard, looking at the drawing, and I think that is the property line near the sidewalk, that's almost 50 feet. It's 49, well, one side is 53, one side is 49. It's irregular, but let's say an average of 50-foot frontage. So if we took 11 feet off of the front, let's say we'd still be at 39 feet a foot setback, and all it's required is 30. So like Mr. Eisenbacher said, because of the odd shape of the lot, the house was built farther back than it needed to be to meet our requirements. So with all that, I would like to vote to approve this motion.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? Mr. Evans, please.
And before the board votes, I did incorrectly state that this was an R1C zoning. It is an R1B zoning. And according to the chart up there, the rear yard setback is indeed 45 feet, just so everybody's aware.
Oh, 40.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, seeing that there aren't any other members who'd like to comment, I believe Mr. Evans, we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Neal,
No.
Mr. Krent,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Mr. Bloomingdale,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Courtney.
Yes.
Motion passes. Congratulations, you have your variance. Have a very good night. Thank you for coming. Thank you. So item 5 is our communications, and we have several on file, and I saw a letter here, which is a little shocking. So I don't know, maybe it's most appropriate to, before we go into the proposed changes regarding the procedures, allow Mr. Bloomingdale to address the board because he shared a letter with us right before the meeting began. Mr. Bloomingdale?
For the board's information, I submitted my resignation yesterday. As I say in the letter, I did for personal reasons and with regret. I have thoroughly enjoyed working with the members of this committee. I think that the decisions that have been rendered by the committee have been well-founded, met the needs of the petitioner, and also met the requirements that the regulations that we work under. I've also enjoyed very much working with city staff, with Mr. Evans. It's been a pleasure to get to know him. I admire his proficiency in what he does. And also the city attorney, you have to help me, Lori Dufresne. There were several things that we deliberated here that she gave some very precise and good direction that helped me tremendously. So, gentlemen, I leave with some regrets, but because it's necessary. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomingdale. We certainly appreciate your service here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And the letters were made available to all board members that Mr. Bloomingdale submitted to the parent copy. I think that he had gone to the original copy to the city clerk. The other item in communications is the proposed changes related to 12/16/2004 for the Zoning Board of Appeals, the procedures that we have that we operate by and the public can operate under as their desire to address this board. Mr. Evans, do you want to address this?
Briefly, yes. Chair Bloomingdale had some, Vice Chair Bloomingdale had some suggestions about just a few of the sentences and phrases that are in the current document, and the one you have in front of you, everything crossed out would be the proposed language to be removed, and the underline words would be added in. And Mr. Bloomingdale, if you have anything to add, please go right ahead. I know you're the one that reads this every time.
I appreciate that, and Paul and I worked, I forget how it started, but it's not really important, but I realized there was some of the language that was, to me, archaic. And then reviewing the whole document, why then between the two of us, we discovered several things that we thought made the English more readable and more understandable.
Okay, so this is, Mr. Evans, this is proposed. So will we take the action on this perhaps at the next meeting?
Unless you had a comfort level with it now.
Did we adopt this originally? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I believe a few years ago we modified it.
But I don't.
But Mr. Courtney, you may have been here when this language was first before the board, whenever it was, and I know last time we didn't make a motion to adopt. It was just general agreement.
Administratively.
Yeah, general agreement.
I know you're getting rid of the operative word that's so important to this board, which is running, regarding practical difficulty running with the land. It's been such a buzz phrase since I've been on this board. It'll be difficult to consider, but it does clean it up. Practical difficulty with the land, which is easier and cleaner. Are there any questions on this matter? Mr. Krent and then Mr. Eisenbacher.
Just a comment. I'm glad Mr. Bloomingdale worked with Mr. Evans to make these corrections. I think it does make it more readable. Anything we can do to make things more understandable to the public is always a good thing. And I understand what you're saying about running, but I've never seen practical difficulties running.
Well, unless there's a slope or on the property and it's raining. So that could be the issue. Mr. Eisenbacher, do you have something?
I like all the clarifications, and it does improve the language. I just had a question about that first line. It does make sense that it's neighbors if the requirement to be on the board is resident of the city of Troy. Are business owners allowed, or is it just residents?
People who own property and live here,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Because I think peers would be as if you're a business owner but not a resident. But
Right. Although it could be,
if it doesn't apply, then,
the liberal interpretations of, interpretation of neighbors is corporate neighbors too, or, which are, I
Okay.
guess, which is in the vernacular commonly in the last decade or more, probably more. Well, I think we're fine, and anyone at any time can make a suggestion, but Mr. Bloomingdale, thank you for cleaning this up. I know I picked the right man for the job when I asked you to start working with that some time ago, so upon your election as vice chairman, so thank you very much. So the next item is miscellaneous business. We do have a presentation, and the hour is growing late, for our city attorney to present some important information. I know she has a PowerPoint, and we're honored to have the actual city attorney herself here tonight, so thank you for coming and spending time with us tonight.
Sorry, let me steal the microphone from Mr. Evans here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for inviting me. I'm always glad to have an opportunity to come and to, do a presentation. A lot of you have been on this board for a while, so it's probably a refresher for some of you. I did print out copies of this so that you can take the copies with you. So we can pass those along. And my style of presentation is to answer any questions that you have as they arise. So please do not feel like you should not interrupt me. I want you to interrupt me if you have a question, so feel free to do that. And again, this is just a refresher of some of the things that you already know, but sometimes it's just good to be reminded of them. So the first one is from Chapter 39, Section 15.01, and it's kind of your responsibilities. And you're established in such a way that the objectives of the zoning ordinance shall be observed, public health, safety, and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Again, very lofty responsibilities that you have. The second one also goes on so that the ordinance may be fully and equitably achieved, and that a means provided for competent interpretation of this ordinance and reasonable relief be provided. So again, you all know what it is that you do, but sometimes it's good to have a reminder. The one thing on here is that the equitably achieved. That's really important, that you are treating everyone the same. You're giving them all the same consideration. And again, it's a lofty responsibility and one that all of you have fulfilled very admirably. You know how many votes it takes for different things, and you know what your responsibilities are. You grant dimensional variances with 4 affirmative votes. You do interpretation of zoning ordinances with, again, 4 votes. Zoning map amendments, 4 votes. I'm not sure that you've had that come before you. I'm not sure if any of you have had that come before you, but that is something that may come at some time in the future. Also, administrative decision appeals, again, 4 votes. The one exception to the 4-vote requirement is the use variances. And have you done any use variances? Anyone? Okay.
Like the Kmart property, former Kmart property on Maple Road regarding the garden
Okay.
situation. I think that's when there's maybe been 1 or 2 others, at least when since I've been on the board.
Okay. The use variances actually is something that was adopted with the new ordinance revision, Chapter 39 revisions. We did not have use variances, allow use variances prior to that time. So it's not too surprising to me that there's been very, very few use variances.
I think there was also a couple of churches in there. Mr. Courtney, can you help me out there? Yeah,
Yeah.
regarding some festivals.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Festival.
Which I think the city council may have devolved from their board, or their table to ours
Okay.
for obvious reasons, so.
Okay, so yeah, it is unusual, though, to have a use variance, and because you're allowing a use that is not consistent with the other properties in the area, that's why you have a supermajority, a 5-vote requirement. And then you know this as well, but your planning commission member, Mr. Krent, in this case, is not able to vote on things that he has voted at the planning commission level. And the procedure is such that doesn't happen. It comes here first before it goes to the planning commission, and that's one of the reasons why it's done that way.
Question.
Yeah.
If there is an item that's come before us, does the planning commission representative step back down and then the alternate come in for that item? Or do we not have a vote from the planning commission member?
You guys are the only board with alternates that I'm aware of, so that's a great thing that you have that others don't. And so if it is a situation, you're going to know it in advance. I would highly recommend that the alternate come and sit for that item, because then you have a full board, a complement of a full board to offer to the residents, and certainly that's always beneficial to have more members rather than less.
Okay. Then I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
And that would be, what would cause an item to go before the planning commission before it came to us?
I'll let Mr. Evans,
For things that are required to go before the planning commission, if they need variances, it's stated in the ordinance that the order that they go is they go to the planning commission.
Okay.
Planning commission won't take any action until the variance is heard, then it goes back to the planning commission.
Okay, so it shouldn't happen if the variance has to come first.
Right, right.
And that is a change from how it used to be, because used to be that it would go to the planning commission, and then they'd send it back to the ZBA, and then it'd go back to the planning commission if the variance was not granted. And you know this, but I always say this, a variance is giving somebody an excuse to break the law. Again, that's what you're doing. If you're giving a variance, you are allowing them to break the law. And so that's why you should be very sparing of your variances. You should apply the standards very religiously. Those standards are there to, to uphold the city's ordinances. And even if there is no perceived harm. For example, one of your cases tonight was there was a church that was in the backyard. There was a church and a wall. I was surprised that they didn't argue that it was the church and that there'd be no harm to anyone. But there is harm if the standards are not otherwise met. There is harm because you're undermining the ordinance and you're making it more difficult for it to be enforced. If you are basing your decision on that particular property and not religiously applying the standards. So again, it always bears repeating. I think you all know that. You've been serving on this board for long enough. But, again, just stay true to what your standards are. And I love the fact that tonight you were going through all of the standards. That's what you should do, is you should decide whether or not all of those standards have been satisfied. Dimensional variances, obviously, this is a refresher as well. And the standard there is practical difficulties. And you can impose safeguards or conditions, and you can reduce the amount. You don't always have to give them what they're requesting. You can give them, a lesser variance if that's what you deem is appropriate. You really should give it the minimal amount that is necessary. And if there is another solution, for example, you did a great job tonight of showing that there possibly was another solution in the first case that you handled tonight. And in that case, it's great that it's postponed and you're going to give the petitioner an opportunity to explore those other petitions. But again, you're living out your mission by deciding whether or not there are other solutions that are possible. And the dimensional variances, you know these standards, but sometimes it's good to go through them. I know you have been applying them, but you must, the applicant always has the burden of proof. I think that's clear as well. And they have to show all of the following. So not just one of those, but they have to show all of the following. That there are exceptional characteristics of the property. And this one too, and I know Mr. Neal kind of was asking the question about this cul-de-sac, and I think he was probably getting at this, whether or not this particular property was different than the majority of properties in the zoning district. That's something that the board needs to decide, and Mr. Neal, if I'm incorrect on that, you can...
You're correct.
Okay. But that's something that you need to decide. It's not just in the immediate vicinity, but it's in the whole zoning, the zoning district. So you need to decide whether or not that property is different than the majority of properties, the great majority, not just the majority, the great majority of properties in the same zoning district. And, you know, related to the physical premises, that's pretty much going to be a given. It's going to be related to that property. Not of a personal nature. Not of a personal nature. It's not going to be sufficient. It's not going to satisfy the standards if the reason why they need a variance is to because they have a health condition that requires a jacuzzi, for example. That's a personal nature, and that is not sufficient to satisfy. And Mr. Eisenbacher, I think you had a question?
You said great majority, and you emphasized that.
Right.
Is there a legal definition of great majority, or is that up to the board to decide what a great majority is? Is it 75? Is it 51? Is it 95%?
Well, again, it's more than 50%, because if it were just 51%, it would just be majority. So the fact that they've used great majority, I think that's up to you to decide. There is no definition of great majority. That is your determination. But again, it's going to be more than 51%.
So then we should probably have an idea of what percentage of the properties in this city are not rectangular.
And I know you have Mr. Evans, who will probably help you with some of that. He's probably got a pretty good idea of some of that. But, you know, most of there are cul-de-sacs, there are, you know, there are throughout the city. So that's maybe something not to give you extra work to do, but... and then just
That for us next meeting.
Yeah. The last thing is that the variance will not be harmful or alter the essential character of the area, will not increase congestion, and will not diminish property value in the area or impair the public health, safety, and welfare. Those are the public health, safety, and welfare. As long as that is in your mind, you are going to be fine. You are looking out for the public health, safety, and welfare. The use variances, since you have had a couple of these, there are some different standards for use variances, and this is one where you can grant a use variance where there's an unnecessary hardship. So that's a different standard than the practical difficulty. It's an unnecessary hardship. And the standards here, applicant can't reasonably, and reasonably is another one of those words that I don't have a definition for, but they cannot reasonably use a property for uses that are allowed under the zoning district. And this is one, too, where you can ask for consultants to come in, or you can ask for experts. The plaintiff or petitioner has the burden of proof. They have to demonstrate to your satisfaction that they have satisfied all of these, substantially satisfied all these conditions. And again, this is one where these are not singled out. You have to, the applicant needs to establish all of them. That's why I've used the and not the and/or. So they need to establish that there is that there is sufficient capacity, that it's not detrimental to the adjacent land, that it's impossible to earn a reasonable return. And note on there, I didn't say highest return. They're not guaranteed the highest return on their property, just a reasonable return. And also that the practical difficulty is not self-created. And practical difficulty is not self-created is a little bit of a difficult thing. Because you might have a situation where they have purchased the property and they've purchased it probably at a discount, knowing that the potential for development is limited. If it's a recent purchase, that could be a self-created difficulty. So that's your decision as to whether or not the difficulty is self-created. Certainly, if they split off the property and they're trying to build on something too small, that's a pretty clear example of where it is a self-created practical difficulty. And just the procedure, it needs to be filed by the record owner or their authorized agent. So Paul is certainly, Mr. Evans is certainly making sure that we have that, but you want to make sure that the person who's asking for the request actually has the ability to bind the property. So you want them to be the registered owner. And of course, there is a public hearing, which you know about, and you do the findings of fact here, and you apply the standards here. Runs with the land. I know there was some discussion about the phraseology. I agree it doesn't need to be in what you read, but it does need to be something that is understood by the board and by anyone who comes with you. It does run with the land. It is not particular to an individual. So you cannot limit it to one person's anticipated use of the property. For example, and that's why you don't allow for personal reasons. The example I gave before about the person who needs a jacuzzi for their health reasons, that is going to be allowed in perpetuity with anyone that has that property. So that's why you don't tie it to personal conditions. It goes with the land. It's whatever's there is going to be allowed in perpetuity. Okay. Yes, Mr. Neal.
I do have a question. You had indicated that under use variances, you had suggested that sometimes an individual may buy a piece of land, even knowing that there may be a deficiency, and they make a business decision and they get a good price for it, for example. I know we can't judge economic factors and conditions when making our judgments, but if we have a property that's, I don't know, has some factor that made it, let's say, so that you could pick it up for a good price. Are we allowed to ask that if we suspect it to be the case, or does that also cross the line and talk about economics?
No, I think that you can find that out because I think that, again, the applicant has the burden of proof, and if you suspect that that's the case, I would want to have that information. I think that would be, you're going to assume that it was bought for a really good price unless they can demonstrate that it was market value or that, so. And if it's a recent purchase, that's something that you should know. I think it certainly is fair game to ask them when they purchased the property.
Okay, thank you.
It's certainly very helpful maybe helpful for you to know when they purchased the property. Another thing that this board can do is administrative appeals, and I know that when the Marinelli's building, you guys all were dealing with that. That was a little unusual. By the way, you handled that all beautifully, and again, developed a great factual record for that. But that is something that you may occasionally be called to do. And so there are different standards on that. You do have to, if it's an appeal of an administrative decision, it does have to be filed within 30 days. And again, the burden is on the applicant to go forward with this. I put it in here that this is a section that we use when we have condemnation cases. sometimes, and we're trying to minimize the damages that, we don't want to make it a total take if we don't have to. We don't want to kick somebody out of their house if we don't have to. So we do use this section sometimes to come before the board and ask, the city uses it to ask for a variance on behalf of a person whose property is being condemned. So I just threw that in there. It's in the ordinance, and so that you may see that. Not that I'm aware of any of them, but that you may see that in the future. And the other thing with this as well is if an appeal is filed within the 30 days, it's going to stay action on it unless there is an emergency that is an imminent peril to life or property. So now you, as a board, if you do get an administrative appeal, you can basically, you can reverse in whole or just a portion of it. You can modify or you can affirm. And the things that you're going to be looking for was that the decision was arbitrary and or capricious. It was based on erroneous findings of material fact. It was an abuse of discretion, or that it was based on an erroneous interpretation of the ordinance or the law. So those are your standards if you have an administrative appeal. Interpretation of the zoning ordinance or the zoning map, again, those are, it's another thing that may come before you, and any of those decisions are going to require 4 votes. You are required, if you have such a request, you're required to consider the intent and purpose of Troy's zoning ordinance. You must also consider the master plan, and you can only change the district boundaries if there's ambiguity. If it's not clear or if there's something that's unclear, you could change it then. Otherwise, you are not able to do that. And then there's some language in the ordinance also that it must be consistent with section 4.03. Those are things such as, the middle of the road. You're going to try and keep it within the city boundaries if you can. It's going to follow the plat lot lines and things like that. Okay. And a lot of these you don't see very often. But that's just a refresher of some of the responsibilities and the standards. The next thing that I wanted to touch on, and again, you all know this because you've all received, I believe, the board and committee appointee code of ethics. It was most recently approved in November by the Troy City Council. And I'm just going to go over it. I think you already know them, but you are to respect the confidentiality of privileged information, recognize that individual members have no authority to bind the city or the ZBA, working with other appointees or board members to further the goals of the ZBA, encouraging free expression of opinion by all committee members, and communicating to City Council and staff as to issues of concern or requiring study or action. Continuing on, to render all of your decisions based on the available facts and independent judgment, making every effort to attend the meetings, which again, I see you're all here, that's a great thing. Becoming informed concerning the issues to be considered of each meeting. So you read your packets ahead of time, you're all prepared, and that's exactly what you have pledged to do. You're avoiding conflicts of interest or the appearance of conflicts of interest. And you are refraining from using your position for personal benefit or benefit of family members or business associates. Again, I don't think no violations, but it just always bears repeating, and I get a chance to come before you every once in a while, and so it's always just good to have that refresher. So conflicts of interest, not only is it in the Code of Ethics, but it's also in the Constitution. Michigan's Constitution, Article 4, Section 10, says that no member of the legislature nor any state officer shall be interested directly or indirectly in any contract with the state or any political subdivision which shall cause a substantial conflict of interest. We also have a state statute in Michigan, 15342, that again basically says the same thing: no financial or personal interest. If you have a financial or personal interest, it's going to be a conflict of interest. Some I guess, some advice or some, just to kind of further down, because it's a difficult concept to figure out conflicts of interest. So you always need to avoid participating. And again, Mr. Eisenbacher, you were correct when you asked about the planning representative, whether they should be participating at the table or whether they should just remove themselves from the room. If you have a conflict of interest, it's my recommendation that you completely remove yourself from the room. Because again, it's all about the appearance. You are taking public input. You want the public to know that you are taking every case based on the facts. It's all, it's not dependent on who they are. You're not being influenced by anything other than the facts and the application of those standards. So, again, you want to avoid any even appearance of impropriety. And also, I think most of you will know that I'm very conservative. If you think that there's a potential conflict of interest, err on the side of disclosure. Err on the side of saying, I live in this neighborhood, I live 4 houses down, I want to disclose that, and then you can let the other board members vote on that if you want. If you don't know, err on the side of disclosure first and foremost, and then if the other board members feel like it's too close of a relationship, or if it's a financial or personal interest that you have, then you've got a vote that's excusing you from voting, and you've got your board members that are supportive of that. So. So those are just some basic, and again, I think you know most of this. You guys have done a good job about making sure that there are no conflicts of interest, but it again, just bears repeating. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Duties of officers, obviously you can't hold incompatible offices. This is a big one. You speak only through your resolutions, and you've committed to, in the board and committee policy, code of ethics, you've committed to not saying that you are speaking on behalf of the city. Also, you're not speaking on behalf of the ZBA. The ZBA speaks only through its resolutions, and individual members cannot bind the ZBA. And also, this is another thing too, and I think Mr. Eisenbacher, you had asked, you had submitted a question about information and whether or not you should be speaking with the applicants. It's my very strong recommendation, and you're not being rude if you do this, and you can just blame it on me and say the attorney said I can't talk with you. That's fine. If you don't want to sound like you're being rude, I'm happy. You can blame it on me. Really, the reason why you don't want to speak with the applicants is because you really want to encourage the applicants to come before the ZBA. You want everybody on this board to receive the same information that you're getting. You also want the public who is here to hear, or who's looking at the meeting that's being televised. You want everybody to hear all of the information that is going into the decision. So it's my very strong recommendation that you don't speak to individual applicants and members. Certainly go do site visits. I want you to do site visits. I don't want to say don't do site visits, but again, if they come out to try and talk to you, just say, I would really love for you to present your ideas to the board. Now that can be, if they can't make it to the meeting, certainly you can send emails, and the board can consider that, and then that's part of the official record. Whatever is considered, you want it to be part of the record, and the way that you do that is you have them submit it through Mr. Evans, or you have them here giving their testimony. And Mr. Lambert, I think you had a question.
Well, you answered my question. I was going to ask about site visits. So.
Oh, okay, yes. No, absolutely. Do the site visits. Don't do them in a quorum, which we're going to get to in a minute. Don't, you guys are attuned to that as well. Make sure that you don't have 4 members in one place. And you can, and we'll get to that later, but if you just all happen to be there and there are 4 of you at the same time, it's not necessarily a violation of the Open Meetings Act, but there is going to be an appearance of that if you are out there. Okay. Just some other things that, this is not in your code of ethics, but this is in the council code of ethics. Just be very careful when you are using electronic media, and, just do the same, same precautions that you would take if you were speaking or using written memoranda. Avoid the use of derogatory or denigrating or offensive language. Last night, I need to tell you, we were in the study session last night, and we had a presentation given to us in the city council in the boardroom by a person who basically used a swear word. It's fine, it's not a big deal, but it's just not something that we wanted to rebroadcast. It's just not something that you want to have happen at a public meeting. It shows a little bit of a lack of decorum. Unfortunately, we were asked if we could, edit out that swear word, and it's really very difficult to do. So, it'll take a week, and then you won't be seeing the meeting for over a week, and so it's a difficult process. So please make sure that you are not that I have any concerns about any of you, but just, again, proper decorum. The members of the public are closely watching what you're doing.
Just a comment.
Yes.
In Michigan law, it's a violation to use public profanity, and it's a ticketable offense. You can't go to jail for it, but a law enforcement officer can issue a ticket. So I would have a slightly different opinion about that, but I wasn't at the meeting. But at the end of the day, I believe in a public body, a person can be, A, told not to use profanity, B, I'm not so familiar with the public record if it's done, but I think the presiding officer should make it as difficult for that person to proceed as possible, so.
Absolutely, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing that up, because that is one of the things that, sometimes you do have unruly persons, or you have, persons that just do not get the message, and they're not showing the proper decorum. A couple of tools that you might, be able to do with that. First of all, the chair is always the person to look to. You guys do a great job of that. Again, you can tell you've been working together for a while, because you're conveying a very professional image, and also the deference to the chair, which again is the cue for the public, that you go through the chair. The chair does have the power to hold a person, call a person out of order, but also, don't put it all on the chair as well. If you see that it's really getting unruly, any one of you can ask for a recess. A recess is a great tool if it's getting to be an unruly meeting. A recess is a great tool for just calmer heads will prevail, and just taking a break. And a lot of times that is the way to deal with anybody that is unruly. And and sometimes again, it might be just so much that sometimes it puts the chair in a very difficult spot too. So all of you have that ability to ask for a recess and help the chair out. If it gets really unruly. So, okay. And just getting to the Sunshine Laws, which really is the Open Meetings Act mostly, but also the Freedom of Information Act and the Bullard-Plewicki Employee Right to Know Act. And I've told you this before, so this is probably a repetition, but I think it really is very meaningful to know that the Sunshine Acts were effective. This version of the Sunshine Laws were effective after Watergate, so it's March 31st, 1977, and that's why we have the versions that we do. They have been relatively the same. There have been some minor modifications to the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act. There are some pending laws right now to modify both of those, but there have been just very minor modifications to both of those laws throughout the years. And certainly you are a public body. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. So you are subject to the Open Meetings Act. And Open Meetings Act, the thing you need to remember is that all meetings of a public body shall be open to the public and shall be held in a place available to the public. Obviously, this is a place available to the public. Obviously, it is a meeting that is open to the public. People can come and even if they have no business, they certainly can be here. Now, there are a little trickier things. This is an easy case. We know that this is a meeting, but you also have virtual meetings that you need to worry about, and this is where you might get into trouble. So, so it's always worth, just a precautionary, be mindful of these so that you don't convene a virtual meeting. For example, a grand opening celebration, you can absolutely attend a grand opening celebration, and it can be all 7 of you if you want, but what you cannot do is you cannot have a discussion or deliberation amongst more than a quorum of you. And I would recommend that you don't discuss or deliberate at it anyways, because again, it's the appearance of impropriety. A big thing right now is an email chain and using that reply to all feature. Again, take that from your computers. Replying to all could inadvertently create a meeting, and obviously you didn't post notice of it because it's an email and you didn't intend to create the meeting. So be very careful about using the reply to all feature. But I also can tell you that you can send communication directly to Mr. Evans, and Mr. Evans can send it to all of you, or to your administrative liaison. So if it's Mr. Frayne or me or whoever, you can send it to us, and then we can send it to all of you, disseminate that information. Again, it's that reply to all and that dialogue that occurs on an email chain that you need to be aware of. Social gatherings, you know about that. Site visits, we talked about that a little bit as well. Just if you're at a site visit, you're all together, just don't discuss the case, don't engage the applicant. And another one is a round robin, which I guess I need to define that. A round robin would be, let's say that the chair wanted to find out how a particular vote was going to be going. And so the chair called around in advance of the meeting and found out how each one of you were going to be voting. That is permissible. What is not permissible is when the chair calls every one of you and then reports that Mr. Courtney is going to vote this way and Mr. Neal is going to vote this way. It's that communication that's a round robin, and again, that's a circumvention of the Open Meetings Act, so you should not be doing that because that's a meeting. That it's going to be a meeting, and obviously, again, you didn't post notice of it because it's an inadvertent meeting or a virtual meeting, so don't do that. Open to the public, you know this as well, but persons can record, televise, videotape, broadcast. They can do pretty much whatever they want. They can have their cell phones and record the whole meeting if they want to. They can have a stenographer here, taking down every word that's being said, creating a record. It's open to the public, so that's something that is allowed under the Open Meetings Act. You must try to accommodate. I don't know how many of your issues are going to require something larger than council chambers, but if you do have something, that you have to try and accommodate. One of the things that we've done to accommodate is we've used the council boardroom and televised the meetings so that people can come in and have an opportunity to comment. We've also used the lower level conference room, just to try and facilitate and make sure that people can hear what's going on, but certainly the more important thing is to allow for them the opportunity to comment about what's going on. You cannot restrict persons from commenting based on their residency, but you can ask where they live, because you need to know where they live so that you can place it in context. So you can ask them where they live. Obviously, if they are really adamant that they're not going to provide it to you, you can consider that they probably don't live in the area and it's not going to be relevant to your decisions. And, again, you can't kick them out. The chair, of course, could ask them nicely and try and get them to provide that information, but don't kick them out. If they are unruly, if somebody is unruly, I think that's happened, a couple of times. Certainly, again, try the recess, but get the police officers down here. I mean, that's, you don't have to put up with that, and certainly you want to make sure that, that you are protected and that you are safe. Reasonable rules, you can enact them. Again, we talked about the swearing, and certainly that's something that you should not allow. You know, and it's not the place for persons to make personal attacks on you, but unfortunately, if it's related to your business and they tell you that you made a stupid decision, you have to just put up with that. So it's just one of the things about being a public official, is that if it's related to your job performance, First Amendment's going to let them basically tell you, as long as it's compliant with your rules and it's not offensive and you know, and polite and all of that. So the proper decorum is being observed. And we already talked about the tool of calling for a recess. And again, if there is a person that is offensive, the chair again can just say, this is not, you know, an opportunity for you to be offensive. Can you please, you know, refrain? Let's talk about this case. Let's talk about what's before us. So. Closed sessions. I don't know that this body has ever gone into a closed session. Really, the only available exception would be if there was an attorney-client privilege memorandum, and if that happened, the closed session would be limited to what is in that closed session memorandum. So again, I don't foresee that that's really something that this board will need to really worry too much about. If there are violations of the Open Meetings Act or FOIA, there can be lawsuits brought by the Michigan Attorney General, the Oakland County Prosecutor, or any citizen. And of course, if there is a lawsuit brought and if we are unsuccessful, the person who brings the lawsuit is able to recover their attorney fees in addition to some costs. And again, the bigger thing is that we don't want to, we are very transparent. We don't want a lawsuit filed against us because, again, we're trying to, we have nothing to hide. We want it all to be done in the open. FOIA, I've just got a couple of slides on FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. So anything that is prepared by, owned, in the possession of, or used by a public body from the time it's created is going to be a public record. And so we should be keeping all of those. And I know that Mr. Evans is doing a great job of keeping every document that comes in. You might want to help and make sure that that's happening. I always make sure that the keeper of the records has everything that is, make sure that the keeper of the record for the record has a copy of every document that is there. The documents are very broadly defined, so pictures are included, emails, anything really is going to be a document. Text messages, it's a little more difficult to figure that out, but emails as well. And, again, if you're using your own personal, I use the BYOD, bring your own devices, because a lot of what we're doing, a lot of it is done on your home computers. If we were to get into a lawsuit, it's very possible that your computers, your own devices, would be subject to subpoena if there was an Open Meetings Act violation or if there is a lawsuit. So, if you have something that's to you, and you want to not risk that your own device is going to be subject to subpoena, you might get that to Mr. Evans, any documents, and then he can keep it as part of the official record. I can't imagine that there are going to be that many. And if he's gotten it anyways, if he sent it to you, he's got it anyways, and he's got retention requirements as well. And so, you don't have to worry too much about that. There is a short time frame to turn around and get documents. We have 5 business days, and then we can maybe ask for a 10-day extension if there are extenuating circumstances. And we always have the burden of justifying the exemption. So, so that is really a very quick, I'm not sure that I've already talked about the enforcement of FOIA and what happens. There are a couple of things that would be exempt. For example, you all have supplied your resumes and your, with the city clerk, you filed your property ownership, just to make sure that there were no conflicts and everything. Any personal information on that, we would redact that before disclosing that. So there are some exemptions that are, for privacy, and we would certainly try and maintain your privacy as much as we could. So it's a lot of information and that I've thrown at you, but I do appreciate the opportunity to come in and to talk with you. I think that there are a couple of extra copies that we can give to the alternates as well. And what always happens to me is just afterwards, I think of the question that I wanted to ask after I leave. And so if that happens to you, please feel free to email me, or you can ask Julie Dufresne if there's a question that you thought of afterwards, and we'll get you the answer right away. Yes.
This isn't really applied to specifically what you touched on, but as you were doing your presentation, I thought of a procedural question that when we're first appointed to this office, we're sworn into office. Is that administered for going forward forever, for perpetuity, or should every time we get reappointed, should we be sworn in again?
Yep, nope, good question. But no, as long as you're not changing your office, then it is good. So you are a zoning board of appeals member, so you would not need to get resworn in. Now, your chair and your vice chair, do you have a swearing in ceremony for that, or are you just, okay, because you could, but all of it, no superpowers of those positions, so it's really not necessary. But yeah, that's a great question. But no, you're good. You're official. So.
I have one question.
Sure.
And it doesn't happen here a lot. I think I kind of did hear one comment from one applicant's representative tonight along these lines. But just because we're all here and we certainly have access to you here tonight, the public comes before this board oftentimes, and they'll make comments much along the lines of, well, you're the city, or, I've brought this to the city, basically addressing these 7 members as being the city administration, or that we're part of the city administration more specifically, I think. And, as near as I can interpret the state law and the city ordinance and so forth, that the city charter that creates this body, we clearly represent the citizens of Troy, not the city administration. But of course, we have support from the city administration and other personnel to help make this panel go appropriately. Can you just address the line? Because I think obviously we're in the city hall. This property here is owned by the taxpayers of Troy, but under the direction of the city administration. So when people walk in, they oftentimes feel like they're addressing, essentially city employees that represent the greater administration.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that you do, which is again not done by the other boards, but you have, you state right up front, we are your neighbors. And I think that that's a great way of doing that. Certainly you do have autonomy. And Mr. Evans does not make recommendations to you on these variances. So again, I think that that's another way of showing that you are autonomous. You do have final authority in whether or not to grant these variances that come before you. Now, if, for example, you make a decision and it's appealed to the circuit court, city administration is going to be there to support your decision, which of course will be based on all of the application of the standards that you have rigorously applied. So yeah, I can understand how the citizens, again, they're coming into City Hall and thinking that, but absolutely, you are autonomous, and your decision, you decide whether or not the variance should be granted, and you decide whether or not the standards have been met.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else for the city attorney? Well, thank you very much. Oh, yes, Mr. Eisenbacher.
I looked it up. Obscene language.
Yeah.
You're incorrect. You can be put in jail.
Oh, wow.
No person shall
93.
utter vile, profane, or obscene language in any public place. A person who violates this section is guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable by imprisonment in the county jail for not more than 90 days, or by a fine of
$500.
not more than $500, or both.
I'm reminded of that because I became aware of that years ago, with the famous cussing canoeist situation in Michigan.
Yes.
And that made national, right?
And-
International headlines, so.
And that was in front of women and children. So in a public building, I think that's a different situation, but absolutely, it is on the books. I can tell you that I have, in my 20 years as being a prosecutor for the city, I've never prosecuted anyone for that, but it's still on the books, so, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Not a civil infraction.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very professional. Item B is the proposed meeting dates for 2015 for this board. Are there any questions or comments on that? So that's received by Mr. Evans, and those will be our dates coming up this coming year for those who are returning. Some people are retiring, I might add, so that doesn't apply to them. Item 7 is public comment from the general public, or we can even have comment from the board. If you'd like to address the board in this fashion, please address, or come to the podium, please. Hearing none, I think we'll dispense with that item, and we move right to adjournment. So just wish everybody a blessed holiday season, and have a very good, happy new year. Thank you very much for coming. We're adjourned.
Yep.